Thanks everybody for showing up. Today we're going to be talking about what's next for modularity. We have a pretty exciting slate of speakers up today. So I'm just going to do a bit of a roundtable here and let everybody introduce themselves. We'll start off with Kairos. We'll have Teddy introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I really appreciate it. I'd say a little bit about Kairos is that it's just Ian Unsworth and I, we started it recently. Our goal is to provide publicly available objective research, kind of from a generalist lens, meaning we want to explore anything from protocol mechanics to tokenomics and market research. And we hope through looking at it from multiple different frames that we can drown out the noise and see what protocols users and builders are actually excited about and what they're doing in space. So the two of us were working on the Binance listings team before this, doing research on the liquid staking market and just Ethereum DeFi market more generally. So we're really excited to learn more about it, you all.
Perfect. Thanks so much. QEDK from Avail.
Thanks, Everclear and Grad for hosting us. So a bit about Avail. We are basically aiming to be the unification layer for Web3. I think a lot of you are probably best acquainted with our Avail DA product. There's a lot of fragmentation in the space. So of course, we kind of want to provide solutions for all of that. And we have Nexus and Fusion coming out soon, and excited to chat about all of that right now soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Nir, Firat.
Thanks for having us. Small addition there. We just launched Nuffle Labs, which I'm now representing, and we are the builders of NeoDA and Nuffle Fast Finality Layer. I'm very happy to be here to talk about modularity and what we're bringing also to the modularity world.
Perfect. And last but not least, of course, we have Matthew from Everclear.
Hello, friends. Yeah, I'm Matthew, head of growth at Everclear Foundation. For those of you that don't know, we are working on building kind of scalable chain abstraction solutions, including introducing kind of this new foundation to the chain abstraction stack known as the clearing layer, which I'm sure we'll get into more throughout the space.
Perfect. Just to kind of kick things off here, let's talk a little bit about modularity. I'll throw this one to Nuffle first. So how do we get to where we are? Can you kind of give us a brief history of modularity from your guys' perspective and how it's kind of evolved over time?
In my opinion, how modularity came to place was Ethereum's roadmap kind of, or the Ethereum community came in together and said, is there a way that we can scale Ethereum, not just on the base layer, but also on higher layers? So that's when it came, the idea of separating execution from consensus, settlement, and data availability. And after that, basically, there's been almost a Cambrian explosion of products that are specialized on different parts of a blockchain stack, let's say. And now we're in a place, right, where there's a bunch of different solutions to a bunch of different problems that are trying to solve specific parts of those problems. And I think that is a very, very healthy way of looking things, just like normal. Just when you think about the internet stack or any service on the internet, right? They're slowly getting specialized on some parts of it. So yeah, that's from my opinion how we're looking at where we are right now.
Perfect. Anyone have anything to add? Some kind of things that you've seen in Web3 that have kind of been an impetus, I guess, for modularity to start expanding the way it has?
I think it's the natural course of things. I would say, I think Solana, for example, has always been the monolithic layer. Their roadmap has been kind of accelerating a monolithic blockchain as much as possible, right? But if you look at today's roadmaps, then there are a lot of other dApps and platforms that are considering becoming SVM rollups or even Solana L2s. So I think it's just something that happens with due course of time. Even with Monad, they're aiming for 10,000 TPS. I'm pretty sure that there are going to be people that are going to be running Monad rollups. So it's just the easier way to do things, I would say. It's definitely harder for the developers to kind of figure out things. But in the long run, I feel this is what's kind of the most economically advantageous for users.
Perfect. What does this current modularity landscape look like? Can we talk about a little bit the prevailing trends or developments in the space?
Yeah, for sure. I think what we are seeing is that like Ethereum rollups have de facto become the scaling solution of choice, right? You can look at the numbers that, for example, Arbitrum is doing or Optimism is doing, and even they're expanding with their respective stacks. For Arbitrum, it's Orbit. For Optimism, it's been Superchain. That's always been their thesis for a long time, and a lot of them are kind of building in Modularity as well. So like I think Optimism calls it RTDA mode, and for Orbit you can have DAC defaults and other availability layers like Avail, Celestia, etc. as well. So the current state of the art scaling is primarily with L2s, I would say. Again, like I think those are probably ripe for a change. I had kind of predicted earlier that probably 2023 would be the year of optimistic rollups, and it somehow was. But I think as time kind of moves forward, we'll kind of see a lot more ZK rollups come to the fore as well. Like CDK, for example, like CDK, I think they kind of announced Ronin Network and Fox partnerships, which are like pretty big partnerships. So I'm kind of excited to see where they land, definitely. But I see as with time goes on, a lot of the I would say not policy, but rather sentiment shift will be towards like how can we improve the state of the art ZK rollup technologies as well. So with layer twos, with layer threes, I think a good example being Degen chain, right? I mean, no one really could figure out that we would need an L3, but there are platforms and dApps that are kind of choosing it today because the cost is like low enough that it kind of makes sense to do that. And of course, I would say another big thing would be interop protocols. So like Polkadot probably makes use of PRC, the relay chain where they connect multiple parachains. With Cosmos, you have IBC, which technically Celestia leverages to some extent as well. And of course, at Avail, we are working hard to kind of build our own Nexus protocol, which basically allows Nexus-based rollups to have a certain level of interop between themselves. And this is kind of to keep in mind that we all need to solve the same problems, which is the problem of liquidity fragmentation, UX fragmentation. And I think that's what Everclear wants to do with their clearing layer as well, right? So that's kind of the paradigm that we're going to move forward into. That's what I feel.
Yeah, I largely agree with the sentiment, and I think you mentioned kind of like this year of optimistic rollups, and I think we're unlikely to see that trend slow, especially as we've seen kind of like an uptick in use of things like rollups as a service, and we're seeing Gelato's RAAS service like pick up and gain a lot more traction. I think we're likely to see throughout this year thousands of new rollups and chains launch, the majority of which will struggle with all of the like kind of complexities and cost inefficiencies associated with bootstrapping enough capital and bringing on cross-chain protocols to lower barriers to entry. And so I think like this is definitely a problem that we're starting to feel in our day-to-day activities, both as users and as engineers in the space. But I think like this is something that we're likely to see worsen kind of like very rapidly. And I think it's fair to say that we're going to see chains struggle for the foreseeable future with kind of like garnering enough attention and like especially enough liquidity to meaningfully bring in users with low barriers to entry.
Perfect. Thank you. So the interchain experience is kind of described as broken from a user perspective. I mean, I think we've all had our issues over the years, moving funds between chains and trying to interact with protocols or sometimes multi-chain protocols that can, have limited functionality between different chains themselves. So can you elaborate on the major UX challenges that users would face when interacting with multiple chains, such as the need, for deep domain knowledge or managing RPCs and gas, things like that? This is open to anybody, by the way.
I think that you need to be somewhat of a high-level domain expert on whatever wallet you use, the token or protocol that you're trying to use, and then kind of the bridge or the way that you'll get to that destination protocol. So if you're a user, you have to find out kind of what chain that protocol or token lives on, and if there's really sufficient liquidity on the chain that you're going to bridge to. So then I think then once you decide that and you say, okay, this is my destination chain, then you need to find a bridge that is able to get you there without having too much slippage, and you have to understand kind of the trust assumptions you're taking when you're going to use that bridge. A lot of the times people just use a centralized exchange to bridge for them, and I feel like that kind of takes away from a lot of what we're trying to build in this industry as well. Then you just are trusting a centralized entity to take you from one place to another. And I mean, there are solutions, but I think this is the major complaints that people have as of right now, is that you need to understand all of that. And then once you get to your destination network, it's like, okay, now I don't have any gas on this network. How do I do that? And now I need to switch my wallet and be on that network. And that's just a 8 or 9 step process that is fairly confusing for people. And I think there are some pretty cool solutions. And like even the Restake from Anywhere product was very cool to me in the sense that I didn't have to, I guess, understand all of the underlying procedures that were happening as I could restake my ETH on mainnet from Arbitrum or another chain. So I'd say that was kind of the first time I was blown away, from the sense that I didn't know exactly what was going on at all times. I didn't have to understand each step.
I think we have worked pretty hard to kind of bring ourselves to the point where Ethereum is easy to use. Like if let's say you were trying to kind of build something on the EVM back in 2020, 2021, like the resources were probably not there. That was the time when you were kind of, the Ethereum Stack Overflow was more alive and people did make use of it. But like if you look at the paradigm now, I think the number of EVM devs, even SVM devs are like insane, and a lot of them are like security researchers as well, right? Like a lot of beginner um, devs are kind of choosing EVM and EVM security as a space which we wouldn't observe back in 2020, 2021. So that's always been interesting to see. So that's kind of how I think we're going to differ today, is that like a lot of the apps are kind of going to choose to do one thing well. So like something like Dymo, for example, where the app is basically just about sending money and then it just works, right? And then there are other apps that kind of try to do other things, right? So like you have stuff like Zapper, right? I think Zapper and Furu Combo were the OGs of their time. I mean, we'll see kind of more solutions with those lines as well. I think one interesting thing I saw probably last month or the month before that was basically the concept of replayable signatures and how you can use them to kind of make cross-chain transactions happen. I'm forgetting the name, and I mean, it was kind of still alpha stuff, but kind of there are more interesting paradigms that you can build upon today that would probably be less thought of or even not possible even 3 years back. So I think we're at least well poised to kind of deal with liquidity fragmentation. Like if you look at Bungie as an example, right? I think they built out the product; it was a good product, and then like what Terry spoke of, right? Like how do you then use the chain? There is no way to do it, and you then build something like Refuel, right, where we basically just get gas tokens as part of the transaction, and then we kind of did a similar thing at Polygon as well. When I was working there, I think we called it Gas Swap, where back when it was just the IP712 before any other standard came out, we basically just integrated with like a transaction tree layer like Economy and just use EIP712, and then we kind of try to do the same thing because a lot of the users would face the same issues. So I think the stage that we're setting now is that developers are more poised to handle like the more complex UX problems. So then users kind of have to deal with it lesser. And I think this will kind of continue further as we progress back into probably 2025 as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with the sentiment. I think we're definitely like taking major strides towards improving user experience and either automating experiences or starting to abstract them away. Obviously, a lot of folks here on the call are interested in and actively working on kind of like some aspects of chain abstraction. I think we still have certainly a long way to go, though, particularly as it relates to most of the major cross-chain solutions. I think like the technical complexity associated with expanding to every new rollup, in addition to kind of like the astronomical liquidity requirements for traditional ERC20 tokens that require AMMs, it just creates this like complex landscape where bridges are kind of like slow to integrate and respond. And so as a result, users are oftentimes using like kind of multiple bridges for multiple routes. And it does still lead to kind of unnecessary complexity. I think we've all had like positions on chains where it's more annoying to unwind them or figure out how to than to basically abandon some small like position or otherwise. And so yeah, I certainly think that we still have a long way to go to get to a place where, you know, things like Renzo are kind of the norm, where folks use it across many different chains and actually don't realize that there's kind of this like interchain complexity happening behind the scenes where, you know, the action's actually occurring on mainnet, but a user on Arbitrum is like none the wiser to this. And so yeah, I agree that we're taking kind of these large strides towards it, and I think unfortunately this is just a long-term problem that we're all working to solve.
Perfect. Lots of great insight there relative to interchain, because honestly, as kind of a low-level user, I'm definitely not the gigabrains that are participating in this chat, or at least close to that level. Solving those problems is pretty much the white whale right now. Applications. We talk about applications struggling as well from a fragmented market, you know, having to expand to new chains or picking the chains that you want to expand to, making those kind of Sophie's choice decisions between putting your time and money and effort towards deploying here versus deploying there, bootstrapping infrastructure, getting liquidity on those chains. How could modularity really help alleviate those issues? Like, what steps are your projects taking to, you know, support app developers in that regard?
Like you said, right, there's a bunch of fragmentation happening, especially the liquidity fragmentation, and people have to use these bridges that we just talked about. How modularity can help, at least from our perspective, what we're doing at Nuffle Labs is we're leveraging EigenLayer's EVS to provide like very simple fast finality layer, which allows these L2s to, or the applications on L2s that are on this layer, to provide faster finality to each other by leveraging constructing security. So a modular product like this would help a DEX to kind of move quickly, liquidity between two different L2s when there's requirements, when they see that they need certain liquidity pools. They don't have to wait for the liquidity, well, the finality of Ethereum. That's something that is important. Again, so this fragmented liquidity also, or any kind of fragmented market, could also be worked on with chain abstraction, just like we talked a bit ago. And chain abstraction, in my opinion, is abstracting the all of these multi-chain or interchain interactions in such a way that at the end of the day, the users are just faced with the applications that they want to interact with in a this is very important, yeah, it's in a secure, fast, and cheap way, because then everything looks like it's just one layer to the outside world. And for example, in Nuffle Labs, again, we're trying to help this with the new DA product, which is a modular product, where the total cost of the transaction of these L2s are significantly going down, so that it will help, again, to move these liquidity between different L2s.
I think another thing I wanted to mention was with modularity, people get to pick and choose. Like previously, if let's say there was a dApp that was kind of building on a chain, like that's kind of all the choices that you got to make, like you just decided what the chain was going to be. I think that paradigm is shifting rapidly towards I guess we can talk about more interesting constructions, right? Like a sovereign rollup, right? These things were probably like not even relevant before, but I think when things come off scale, things like DYDX, or let's say you're building Aave v3, then you kind of have the money and the time to kind of build out a proper solution. Like, so I think a very common thing that we used to say at Polygon was building for the next billion users. And the fact is that like no dApp today or no chain today is really designed for a billion users. So like it doesn't really matter like how close you are to whatever number you are, but with economy of scale, it does make sense to kind of give developers the choice, right? Because like let's say a Rust-based team, right? It might inherently make more sense for you to kind of build with Avail because like at Avail, like most of our infra is written in Rust, which means that Rust devs kind of will have a much easier time kind of building with it. Then maybe you want to leverage KZG commitments, or maybe you don't want to. So depending on that, the fact that developers kind of have a choice, although it comes at a risk of a slightly additional added complexity, that is kind of something that we are offering that was not possible before. So I think that's another thing that is really good in the modular space that would not be possible before. And of course, the added advantage being that whatever platform is building it, Nuffle, Avail, Celestia, they kind of can build aggregation solutions that kind of enable other things. So like for us, it can be in the form of Nexus. For Celestia, it can be something like IBC. It sort of depends, but it does mean that even when you kind of pick a platform of choice, it does offer additional benefits, and it's not necessarily like a platform lock-in that would be previously, right?
And then happy to chime in here from the Everclear side. As far as what we are doing to kind of like both alleviate, user experience and then help developers navigate in kind of like, I guess, an increasingly fragmented modular world. Through Everclear, we're basically like enabling more efficient use of liquidity and rebalancing between chains. We found that like the best approach towards chain abstraction, and both for developers, like enabling their application to kind of seamlessly be accessible from any given chain, and then for users to be able to interact locally in whatever environment or chain they're on. We found that the best approach to this is intent protocols. But unfortunately, like intent protocols today suffer from these underlying liquidity requirements that basically, as solvers get repaid, they're repaid in the opposite direction that users are moving, and it kind of creates these complex and costly rebalancing requirements in order for that capital to be usable again. But what we ultimately found is that if you kind of zoom out and you look at all of the interchain flows that we experience today, the vast majority of them can actually be netted off, which is to say, on any given day, maybe like for every dollar flowing from Ethereum into Arbitrum, 80 cents is then flowing back. And so Everclear effectively allows protocols to kind of track these repayments as IOUs, and then effectively over some clearing period, we can net them off, allowing for kind of like higher efficiency and capital utility. And so rebalancing happens kind of like locally, and you're able to settle these kind of repayments atomically, as opposed to doing these interchain transactions. And so from the Everclear side, we're mainly focused on solving these lower level liquidity requirements that are holding back chain expansion for applications and delivering chain abstracted experiences.
Perfect. In the future, we're likely going to see, like thousands of different chains coming to market. Like, I mean, I don't know if anyone's keeping an official count, but exponentially, we're seeing a massive increase year over year right now. Expansion, of course, is pretty slow and custom process for a lot of these protocols and for the various infrastructure types that they're deploying. So what kind of emerging problems do you foresee in this cycle, and what can we do and what can your protocols do to address those?
I think one big problem, at least that I would personally talk about, is developer fatigue. So it's kind of very hard for a developer today to kind of keep track of everything that is happening, like whether it be EIPs, whether it be PIPs, whatever it is, right? Like let's say that Everclear comes out with a new solution today. Again, like not a call out, just as an example. Like obviously we are all very excited to kind of learn what the new tech is, but with every new technology, there's sort of like a cliff where kind of developers is slightly acquiescing to it, kind of trying to understand it, trying to kind of figure out how to use it, right? And at least what I have observed is that is sort of the hardest part of the puzzle, right? Kind of convincing developers that it's the right choice, because I feel developers are a particularly sticky demographic, right? There's a high chance that people who are building in the EVM 3 years ago are kind of the same ones building in EVM today. At least that's what I am, right? Of course, like still I'm kind of having my foray into the modular space, but it still doesn't mean that I'm not an EVM dev. So in terms of developer fatigue and developer resource strain, I feel that is something that will kind of become more obvious as we kind of have more chains, especially as we also have the concept of a VM, right? Because when we have roll-up stacks, we have roll-app stacks. There will be soon a question like when you have a choice of VM, you have a choice of DA, which have like certain added questions. And with those added questions, of course, it means that you kind of don't understand what you're giving up and you don't understand what you're gaining. Of course, like as at Avail, the way that we kind of want to resolve this is, of course, with superior developer education, where we're actually going out and putting the extra effort into kind of making sure that people at the grassroots level kind of understanding what we're trying to say. But of course, a lot of it is going to be outreach plus like how it's like targeted programs to kind of figure out what the current status quo problems are, and only then we can kind of resolve it.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, applications are always chasing ever increasing TVLs and larger user bases, as well they should. But in a world where new chains are launching as frequently as they are, and we're seeing kind of like various incentivization mechanisms and points programs that are kind of causing users to expand increasingly to the interchain, applications are left in a place where they are struggling to like make it to where their users are going and participate in the newest opportunities on a given chain. As like end users, they often take for granted the amount of liquidity necessary to make many of these applications work. And so to that end, I think we will see kind of like applications struggle increasingly to garner enough liquidity, and historically they've kind of gone to these foundations associated with the chains to ask for that. But as kind of like a cross-chain solution provider, we've seen firsthand that the chains like increasingly are struggling with garnering enough liquidity as well. And so in a world where we're seeing new chains launching kind of on a very regular basis, I think this problem gets a lot worse this cycle.
I think one aspect that we will probably see very, very clearly, maybe not soon, but eventually when there's a lot of rollups launching or new chains are launching, there will be this, especially if you're trying to go to this chain abstracted world, the underlying security assumptions will be also blurred out, which is actually a very dangerous place to be. Because if you want to, let's say, bridge to a rollup that just came out that is hot, but you don't know as an end user what the security assumptions of that is. Is it a multi-sig? Is it a like stage 3 rollup? You don't know, right? And I think that is going to be a problem where we will see some rollups, some sequences disappearing, escapes hatch not being implemented, and then that would be a world that I don't want to see personally, and we don't want to see as a company also. But I can foresee that this might happen. So we should be thinking about some kind of a base security assumption or some kind of a way for maybe in the UX or UI layer to showcase the security level or risk assumptions of these rollups. And I think L2B does a great job right now, but eventually there should be it should be more public and more accessible to users, or maybe through knowledge sharing, or maybe through the first point of contact for those users.
Awesome. Well, that kind of just leaves us to a point where we got to ask, where do we go from here? What are everybody's predictions, I guess, for the future of modularity in this space? We're basically somehow already halfway through the year and just about to enter quarter 3. So what's coming down the pipe? What else will happen in 2024, and what do we got to look forward to in 2025?
From our perspective, I think the thing that we're likely to see is a lot more like chain abstraction. I think this will become the norm. We've been talking about chain abstraction for quite a long time now, and I think historically we have found people say, that's really interesting, that's a cool idea, but we don't really have time to prioritize UX. And I think in a world where things are getting increasingly fragmented, we're starting to see a lot of amazing projects working on chain abstraction, and I think as that continues, like, we will see the bar raised for user experience and for applications in the space, where they increasingly strive towards having like a single unified UI that persists across chains, so that users don't really need to think as much about those interactions. I agree. I think security is going to increasingly become a concern, and that's something that should be prioritized to be embedded in the UI, so that it's kind of like ever present for the user. And you're making sure that like this information is readily available without necessarily having to take steps outside of the user journey. And so I think that's a lot more of what we're likely to see over the next year, is this consolidation of kind of information and different architecture just being abstracted away from the user, or at minimum creating an experience where users don't have the journey that they do today, where maybe like you want to lend into a protocol, but you realize, like it's on a different chain, and you have to figure out the bridging and RPCs and gas management. And then once you're in that environment, you have to kind of like navigate the complexities of being on a new chain. I think we're likely to see a lot more of that journey just kind of be consolidated, where the user never really like leaves app interfaces. And so I think that's my hope. We're seeing with some applications like Renzo that are on 8 chains now and are chain abstracted. We're seeing there's value in this for developers as well, right? Like, they've garnered over $1 billion in additional TVL, and have grown their user base substantially just by being able to kind of seamlessly go where their users are. And so I think we'll see over the next year applications start prioritizing this more.
I guess a quick thing from me would be, I think there is a hump where obviously more and more responsibility falls on the developers, both for teaching their users about security and creating this world where chain abstraction is really facilitated into every application. But I also think at some point it does get better, in the sense that you don't need to be chasing every new chain to kind of expand your user base, or kind of growth hack by deploying on every chain. Like, at some point, I think those narratives die, in the sense that people don't care about what chain they're on as much. So your application can be on a chain that you trust and that you think is going to be around for a while. But you don't need to be jumping from every new roll up that users are talking about just because there's an airdrop in 6 months.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that sentiment. I think a trend that we have seen that will kind of continue into the future as well is the concept where we have like hyper specialized blockchain layers, right? Like, so technically there will be chains that sort of excel in a particular field specifically. So like stuff like DA or computation or settlement. I think Ethereum has been the settlement layer of choice for a while now, and I think that trend will continue as well. At Avail, for example, where we leverage cutting edge KZG commitments, we kind of obviously want to specialize in DA as well, and over time, kind of we will build solutions for seamless cross-chain interop as well, right? Which is why we're building Nexus, and of course, every other platform is going to kind of build their own sort of a open garden of sorts. I think that's sort of the benefit that modularity would offer you, right? Because if you look at the stacks of today, they are kind of all walled gardens, and that's sort of what you kind of get to choose in the modular space, is that you can have an open garden where you're kind of building across chains, across stacks. And like you don't need to worry about the internal mechanics, because like you'll have underlying platforms like Gelato, RAS, or you'll have let's say Zeev, that kind of do all of those decisions for you. So that's kind of the solutions, I think, that will kind of be more and more promising in the future as well.
On my side, I think we're going to see more and more interop protocols coming into play as there's more and more chains happening. And I think that trend of kind of like aggregation layers and unification layers or fast finality layers are just going to come into play more and more to kind of like get over this fragmentation that is created by this, like I said, exposure of new chains or new L2s or new L3s.
Then we'll start to wind things down here. So let's talk a little bit, just to kind of clean things up. How can the greater community get involved in the development and promotion of modular blockchain solutions? Are there any specific initiatives you're currently pursuing with the community that they can support?
Likely no. Connext has recently kind of undergone this rebrand to Everclear, and with it. And so if you are a developer and are kind of like interested in chain abstraction, or you're an intent protocol where you're kind of dealing with the lower level requirements around rebalancing and solver complexity, I guess we would love to chat with you and work with you to kind of like find better solutions.
Like just expanding on the open garden thing I was saying earlier, like one thing that kind of you'll see with most of the modular platforms today is like almost all of the code is open source and freely licensed, right? So it's actually truly fast software. So it's like truly like if let's say you are a contributor who kind of wants to help with any particular platform, you just kind of go ahead and you just make your commit. And then if it's good enough, you're just going to be part of that particular project. And then, as you know, there's also a history where open source contributors do get rewarded fairly for their contribution. So that's kind of something interesting in the space. We would love to chat with you if you're like a DApp or a user who wants to learn what DA is, anything, forever. We are kind of there for you.
Yeah, to echo that, this is something that I really like about this industry, that everything that we do is either open source or will be open source. And in that way, we also at Nuffle Labs, we just launched. You guys can go out into our GitHub and check all of our work that we're doing. Like I said, if it's not open source now, it's going to be open source very soon. So you can come in there and jam on the products that we have. Again, you can go to nuff.tech, which is that website, and then you can check the projects that we have, open issues, open PRs. We're always very, very welcoming to any kind of open source contribution.
Perfect. All right, so let's wrap it up then. I'll give everybody an opportunity to give their final thoughts, key takeaways about future of modularity, and anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners, anything coming up for your projects or chains. So we'll start with Firat with Nuffle. Give us your last takes.
I do believe that going forward, definitely modular space is going to expand. There's going to be hyper specialization in the field, and as Nuffle Labs, we're very much in the forefront, and we're big advocates of that modular stack and modular technologies. And like I said just before, please feel free to reach out at our Twitter page, Nuffle Labs, or if you want to go to the website, nuff.tech, we have a contact form that you can contact us. You can contact me on Twitter if you guys want to contribute to the project or talk about anything that we're doing, basically. Like I said, I feel the expansion is going to continue, and I'm very, very happy to be also in this space with these incredible people.
Perfect. Thank you so much. QEDK from Avail, give us your final thoughts.
Yeah, I think just echoing Firat's sentiment, like we have big faith in the modular space. Like it has been sort of our goal since 21. So yeah, happy to be here. If you're a dApp developer or anything that you want to learn about DA, please use the Turing network. Like we have a pretty expansive LC network as well, so you can kind of contribute to the chain security even by running an LC, right? So yeah, like feel free to reach out via Twitter, email, whatever. And yeah, thanks for hosting us, everyone. I think the goal is pretty clear. Let's unify Web3.
Wonderful. Definitely in agreement. Teddy from Kairos.
Yeah, thank you again for having us. It's always exciting to learn from the people that are building this space and see it from a different perspective, as I'd traditionally consider myself just a user and researcher. So I always learn a bunch from you, and please reach out via Twitter if we can collab on any research or talk more about your product and learn about it, because we're generally curious in everything that's going on in the space. So we'll be around, and we'll be publishing, I guess, publicly available researches in the near future. So thanks again, guys.
No problem. And last, but definitely not least, Matthew from Everclear.
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you guys for joining and for the interesting conversation today. As I mentioned, just briefly, Connext has recently rebranded to Everclear and announced this new protocol and this new clearing layer. And so If you haven't read about it yet, I'd encourage you to do so. It's pinned on our Twitter account. Would like to just close by echoing the same sentiment as everyone else here. I think we're seeing exciting times ahead of us with the launch of new chains and more specialization. And we're excited to be part of the solution of helping to kind of unify this and combat the effects of fragmentation that are an unfortunate side effect of modularity. So excited to keep building with all of you guys, and thanks again for joining.
Perfect. As noted, thank you so much to all of our speakers for joining us here today. You are the people that make this entire ecosystem go around. If you're not already following all of our speakers here, you definitely should be doing so. If you have any questions or you'd like to interact with our community with Everclear, please go ahead to discord.gg/Everclear and join us on Discord to get involved and get building. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys all next week.